Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors. It is Monday, the 5th of February in the year of our Lord 2018, and we are at the Stayton Community Center for a Stayton City Council meeting. Boom. Let's have a flag salute. All those of a kind... Let's see. What am I trying to say? Anyway, let's have a flag salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Our staff is here this evening. Our Land Use Council, Mr. Wally Lean, is here joining us. Our Land Use Director, Planning Director is absent, Mr. Fleischman. And I guess everyone's here. Else. Okay, so let's see, additions to the agenda, or do we have any this evening? Any declarations of ex-parte contact, conflicts of interest, bias? Just casual disinterest? No? Okay. All right. None of that. And presentation, comments from the public. I'm going to take, if you folks from Jana, if you'll permit me, and North Santa Em people, let me get these two public comment requests. Marion, Mr. Barker, if you would please. Tell us who you are and where you live, and you have the floor.
Okay, I'm Marion Barker. I live at 2155 Kendall Way. The next door neighbor is our notorious neighbor. Everybody's aware of. In May, no, I'll take that back. In March 17th, my wife and I started keeping contact of vehicles that came in to our next door neighbor, in and out. And up through 11/27 of 17. We did not continue there for approximately a month, maybe a month and a half. And the camera was installed again November 21st. So that camera was taking some of the load off for the evening stuff. We started again on 1/23, and up to today, there have been over 500 vehicles that we have written down and passed on to the police department in and out of that neighborhood. Over 150 people by bicycle, walking, or whatever means. They come in from the north, they come in from any direction they can come. It's just we happen to catch them. That's what my wife and I have physically seen. It's to the point now where when they walk through, some of them have pit bulls. And when they walk by in front of our house, the pit bull is usually leaning on the leash, looking right at us. I do have over a 30-inch piece of steel pipe that for protection, but I also have a carbine in my bedroom. I don't know how serious these people are, but there is a pit bull there now that they let in and out that is nothing but a pain in the rear, and I'm afraid he's very vicious. So we have to be very, very careful so that neither one of us get hurt. Anything that this council can do and the city to help alleviate this problem, we will be more than happy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marion. I don't know, does that testimony, can anyone say anything, Chief, maybe?
because of the ongoing investigation, it's very, I can't say a whole lot, just because I don't want to give away what we're actually doing and working on it, but it is a project we've been working on very heavily. There's been numerous arrests made out of that location. There's been search warrants done at that location, and we're right now we're in a spot where we're waiting for the court to do what it needs to do on their end. But we're still continuing to work on it, and we'll continue to work on it.
Mr. Mayor, might you note some of us have also interceded, some of us, you and I and Keith, have also interceded on his behalf.
Okay. Chief, there anything you can say to Mr. Marion and that neighborhood about the kind of time involvement the department's spending on this?
We've put in, I don't have an hourly count on it, but I know that we've put in hundreds of hours on this project. The officers have stopped many of those vehicles that he's referring to coming out of there, and they've made arrests from those stops. They've towed vehicles from those stops, and they will continue to do that as we wait for the court to do its work. If we need to, we will take further action. They're right at the location itself. What might be that might help the neighbors that are in that area is we met with all of them when we first started the project over there, and it's probably time to have another neighborhood meeting over there to meet with all of them and update them individually where we are at with it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I've talked to Wally, and several of us at the dais appreciate your concerns and have taken action to make sure your concerns are heard.
Okay. Patty Armstrong, please.
I haven't talked in public for a while, so bear with me. I'm going to add a little bit of information because I live in the same neighborhood. First of all, I would like to thank the police department. And I'll probably embarrass myself, but you guys have worked your butts off out there.
Where does she live?
And we all know that.
Patty?
And we appreciate that.
Patty?
Yes,
Excuse me. Do you live at 2155 Nighthawk
I do. 2155 Nighthawk Avenue.
Avenue? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
You're welcome. I apologize for that. My name is Patty Armstrong. Two reasons I'm here tonight. One is in regards to the proposed teen center that is supposed to go actually diagonally across from this drug house. Through my church, I'm actually signed up to volunteer at that teen center when it gets going, and I look forward to that. I think it's a wonderful spot for kids who need some help, but they have to walk right by this house, and it's a dangerous location for them. Not knowing what kind of life or lives these teens have, we don't want to add to their problems. But given that, my question is to ask the council to do everything they can. Mr. Campbell, thank you for your letter that you sent on behalf of this topic. Very, very much appreciated. I am an investigator by profession. I'm retired. I used to work for Miller, Nash, Wiener, Hager, and Carlson in Portland. And I have had discovery with police departments on various and sundry issues. I'm also a past foster parent, and I have two adopted children who are both drug babies. One of them is soon to be 48 years old. She had other horrible problems associated with her drug problem when she was born. I didn't get her till she was 9 years old. She has had a drug problem since she's been 12 years old. I know the life of a drug addict. I know their serious condition. I know how angry they get. I know how physically intolerant they get. I know how they can attack when they need a fix. And it's scary. This home, the people that are in this house are dangerous to us. This neighborhood is young people with young children, senior citizens, and you know, people of all ages. I have come face to face with Mr. Sims, what's it called? Mastic?
Huh?
Scott's dog is a bull mastic.
No, that's a pit bull.
That's a pretty big pit bull.
It's a brindle.
And it's mean. And when I was told by the police months ago, I live in the last house on the last street. We bought the last house in that property. If I'd have known there was a drug dealer there, I'd have never bought that house. I have a 7-year-old child who is used to drug people coming from behind our house from the trailer park, walking along our fence and then jumping in our yard for some odd reason, I don't know why they do that, to get down to the road to get to Scott's place. Whenever my little girl sees a stranger now, she thinks, Mommy, you know, she gets all upset. You know, even when we're driving through the neighborhood, Mommy, is that person, you know, dangerous? I haven't even told her that much. She instinctively knows some of this stuff. But I see people all the time. I have seen children go to his house. And I have been to the police and described specific children who I believe could be runners for him. There are old people coming from the trailer park to young people, 15, 16 years old. So my family is fearful of being in there. I think we should be afraid of Scott. We should be afraid of his clients and anybody who goes in there. And I don't want to see him behind me anymore. The police actually told me to quit walking behind my house unless I was packing. I'm not going to pack, but I believed him because I have seen drug addicts in action and I know what they're capable of. Is there anything we can do to keep him in jail? He gets out of jail one day and he's back with those people. You know, he must be texting all of his clients when he's driving home from the jail because he's busy as soon as he gets home. You know, we saw somebody new today. You know, and they don't, you know, they don't care when they walk out and they hide their heads and away they go. And let me tell you, some of them are close to death. They're skinny. It's heartbreaking what drugs are doing to our environment. I have another concern because of the children involved in that home. It's my understanding that there are no young children right now in his home. They do have parties until late at night, making lots of noise, and there's been young children. As a foster parent and as an investigator, I am well aware of the sex trade, and it is very active in our own community. This man scares me, and we need to be aware of what he is capable of doing. And I know he's not the only drug dealer in town. He just happens to be in our neighborhood. So is there anything we can do or the city can do to help keep him in jail? And again, thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. We just could not appreciate it anymore. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your support, and have another meeting with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, this is part of our neighborhood right here.
Okay.
Mary and I are not the only ones here tonight.
Well, this is how neighborhoods start to make things happen. Rise up, and so on and so forth, and keep talking to the gentleman in blue down here. Okay. Anyone else have anything before we go to North Sandian School Board update? Then, ladies, you're on. Gentlemen?
So, my name is Garrett Trott. I'm currently the chairman of the North Sandian School Board District Board of Directors. And just to give you a little background on what we're going to be doing here, so we had a conversation back at one of our board meetings back in October, November, and we really feel that communication is really critical for what we do as a district and as a city. We both are on boards. We both work under governance, and we just really felt that communication was very critical. We tried to think of ways we could really communicate better, and we thought this would be a perfect way to do so, to come to you. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to be here this week. We're at Sublimity next week, and then we're going to the Lyon City Council sometime later this month. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the district, where we're at, what we're doing. If you do have questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask. And I do want to give you a little bit of warning. I do understand that I have 10 minutes on the agenda. I gave this presentation on Friday, and it was 30 minutes. So I'll try to keep it fast. But please, if I go over, if you want to say, hey, we need to move on, feel free to say, hey, stop. We'll go ahead and stop. You have all the agenda. Want me to stop right now? And actually, I can't even see it right now. There you go. That's better.
There we go.
So say something because I can't see you. So I'll try to keep this under 10 minutes. I want to begin just by introducing Bradley Phelps as well. So Bradley is our student representative on the board. One thing, as you all are as well, we are voted into the district. We're voted onto the board by the constituency in Lyons, Mahama, Sublimity, and Stayton. And so Bradley is appointed. So he's a member ex officio. He does not vote, but he does offer some critical insight from a high school student's perspective into what we're doing as a board. And I think that's something we've been missing out on for several years. We began the discussion last spring, and Bradley's just been a wonderful asset to the board. He gives us, again, a perspective from a high schooler that's just been incredibly valuable. So I believe that's Bradley up there and myself shaking his hand. So just so you know, the North Sandian School District has about 2,300 students, about 280 employees, 6 campuses containing 21 buildings on over 100 acres of properties. These campuses include Sublimity, Sublimity School, which is K-8, Mary Lynn School, which is K-8, Stayton Elementary, which is a K-3, Stayton Intermediate and Stayton Middle School. The Stayton Intermediate is a 4-5, the middle school is 6-8, and Stayton High School. And again, our numbers are right around 2,300. So one of the things that we did, again, was add a student representative, Bradley Phelps. I'm going to ask him to come here. We're going to kind of tag team a little bit. So Bradley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Bradley Phelps. I'm a senior at Stayton High School, and I am a student representative to the school board. So yeah, the current graduation rate last year was 81.25%, which is an increase about 8% over 2016 and about 5% over the state average. First semester just concluded at our high school, so we're still tabulating our what this upcoming graduation year is going to look like, but we're looking at an increase and we're predicting an increase. The grad rate, on top of that, the grad rate will continue to increase as we implement new systems into the school district and especially to Stayton High School. We recently added a new specialist for this. We call her the Dropout Prevention Specialist, and she was a result of Measure 98 funding. So she spends her days checking the grades of struggling freshmen and working with them one-on-one to make sure that they're doing what they need to do to keep on top of themselves and getting towards graduation. And that kind of keeps some accountability there. And they check in with teachers and all that sort of stuff to see what they can do. All right, can I get to the next slide? All right, cool. So recently, Stayton High School received a $336,000 grant from the state of Oregon to establish a Health Pathways program, and a $40,000 grant for a summer CTE boot camp for middle schoolers. So these are really great programs. At the high school right now, we have pathways that students can take for the fields that they're looking to approach. So we have business, medical, construction, all sorts of different pathways for people and where they're looking to go. And this is a really big boost to our medical program, and is really looking to get hands-on experience with actual medical tools and mannequins, and we're adding a whole new staff member to the high school to teach this class, and it's a really great program. I mean, so yeah, like some of the high schoolers that I'm with now, our seniors, we're just kind of jealous that we're missing out on all this opportunity. So it's really great, and it's going to be awesome for the high school. These courses will take effect next year, and the camp will occur next summer and the summer after that. These are our sponsors, or some of the people that we're working with to make this happen. It's been really great, and they've really showed how strong a community we have and how much support we have. So yeah, that's great. One of the other pathway projects that is pretty visible to the community is the SHS construction project. This is part of our construction pathway. So these high school students, part of the construction class was they went out and built this whole house and worked with experts to get this completed. It should be on the market this month, so look out for that. It's almost completely finished. I think they're just finishing up the listing process and all sorts of stuff. So our other pathways include business, criminal justice, primary education, agriculture, and science, technology, engineering, and math. So the goal of a pathway is to provide experience that will ultimately go beyond the classroom. And yeah, so it's been a really great implementation. With the completion of their pathway, every student gets a little note on their transcript that says they've completed that pathway to submit to their colleges, and it allows us to complete our freshman year. It's part of a program that allows us to complete our freshman year at University of Oregon, and yeah, it's great. So thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about AVID. AVID's one of those acronyms that unless you're in education, you don't know what it means. Honestly, I don't know what it means except for it's written here. So AVID stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. And that sounds like a neat idea, but one of the things that I've really appreciated about what they've done with the middle school, AVID is really intended to be for kids who usually, they don't have much prospects for college. It's meant for middle class kids who really tend to be overlooked when it comes to college. And the idea is to really begin to think about college. But one of the things I appreciated what Mike Proctor and Matt Olson, the principals at Stayton Intermediate Middle School, have done. They've taken the principles of AVID and they've applied them all across the school. A classic example, my son is in 6th grade at Stayton Middle School, so I kind of have some personal experience with this. But one of the things that they try to do is very important, and I think we'd all agree with this, but being organized. And just being able to keep a schedule, being able to write down your assignments and when they're due. These are things that my son and I are quite a bit different when it comes to our temperaments, but these are the kind of things my son really needs to know in order to do well, not just in school, but in life. I think we've all had situations where if we miss an appointment or if we're 20 minutes late for something that's due, it's important, it's critical to our profession, it's critical to what we do. And that's one of the things that AVID is trying to implement among a number of skills that we're trying to teach our kids. Personally, I think AVID is just a great program. And again, it's designated for specific individuals, but just because my son is not in an AVID program does not mean he is not getting the AVID elements taught to him. Another nice thing about our schools is the 4th and 5th grade is actually going to be an AVID Showcase school here this month, I believe, later this month. And what the AVID Showcase does is we're having teachers come and view what we're doing with our AVID program, which means they're doing very well, very exceptionally well, especially the 4th and 5th grade level. AVID has just been a cool program. And I want to emphasize again just what Mike Proctor and Matt Olson have done with this. They have just taken the program and ran with it, along with their teachers. And it's so encouraging to see them run with this, really being able to implement things campus-wide that's really impacting how the kids learn. I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's going to go into something that's a little bit different here. So.
My name is Laura Whipper, And I'm the old timer on the board these days. I'm in my, just started my 4th term on the board. And I don't remember that Garrett clarified that, well, he and I worked together for the prior couple years. I was chair for 2 years, and he was vice chair. We typically have term limits, and the vice chair often rotates into the chair position. And so Garrett is our current board chair, and this is his first year in that role. Anyway, I'm going to, you have, in the interest of time, you do have a handout, so I'm going to make my part brief. I didn't even plan to speak tonight. But I want to make you aware that we have always emphasized developing our teachers, always, but we have done a much more concerted effort in recent years to make it coordinated and to look for best practice. We used to have individual school schedules, and now everybody has the same in-service day, the same schedule, so we can have district-wide training. And some of the things that we've been able to take advantage of, in addition, support AVID through a grant from Nike, we were able to send 11 teachers to Denver to learn additional improved instruction. And in addition to that, 20 other teachers volunteered. So there's quite energy around this AVID program. The type of folks that we have come to the district are high caliber as well. There is a math teacher that I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name. You can read it in your handout. But he's been nationally awarded multiple times. And it's that kind of caliber of instruction and learning that our teachers are also benefiting from. I'm going to talk a little bit about sports. I was talking to Mr. Porter briefly and before we started, and we were talking a little bit about sports. Our boys in cross country and soccer teams both placed second in state this last year. So, and we've had a perennial success with our soccer teams being often contenders for state title over the last few years. Our baseball program, though, suffered a loss about 4 years ago, where our batting facility collapsed in one of those periods where we had a lot of snow. We have those like hoop houses with well, that heavy visqueen on it, and it didn't hold up under a little bit of snow, and it all collapsed. So we've not had a batting facility for a while. So we had to organize ourselves and get ready, and working with the Booster Club, we are ready to, I think we've been working on permits with the city, and we hope to have a really nice batting facility in place for this upcoming season. Another thing that you might not know is our girls team is ranked, the last time I looked, I think our girls basketball was ranked 5th, and they're having a good season. I would encourage you to come and watch if you get a chance. Our boys went 5-0 in the first half of league. They lost Friday night, but they've been doing really well, and I would encourage you to come and watch those guys as well. So that's all I want to add in the interest of time. So I'll turn it back to Garrett.
Sure. And I have one last thing I want to touch on, and this is kind of a cool thing that we've done as a district, and that's the mobile app. And you'll see there's a whole bunch of information in the handout that you can go through. The nice thing about the mobile app, as I'm sure you're aware, is communication is so critical in what we do with everything. And the mobile app really enables teachers, parents, administrators to connect in a new way. So the app is available on the Android, on the iPhone. And one of the nice things that I like about it as a parent, and again, this is not a good example, unfortunately, but I'll use my son again. So my son had a late assignment that did not get turned in on Friday. And we were able to find out because both my wife and I got texts the minute it was not turned in. Now, whether or not that's good for my son or not is a whole nother issue, but we're able to know when things are done, when my son is not catching up with the assignment. Now, it turns out he did turn it in, but he forgot to put his name on it. So he checked with the teacher this morning, I think it was, put his name on the assignment, everything's happy. So, but again, just that ability to be able to know how my son is doing, it has his lunch allowance in there, just all the information I could ever want for my son regarding school, how he's doing, attendance, tardiness, etc., is right there on the app. And it's just been a great way for people to connect very simply. Instead of going into the district website, trying to memorize different passwords to get into different venues, this really has everything right there, which is so helpful. And again, my son is in middle school, has not even in sports yet, so I'm sure when he gets into sports and all that kind of stuff, it'll be even better. But again, I just want to thank you for your time. And again, if you have any questions, I'd like to open up to you guys if you got questions for us. But thank you for your time and thank you for listening to us. Thank you. Yes. Oh, of course. Of course. So, Officer Butler is the new, what's the term? School resource officer. Thank you. And the car he made there, it's a police car, has the Eagles on it for Stayton and the Regis Rams on it because he does both, of course. And again, I've run into him more than often. I pick up my kids at Stayton Elementary, and it's just so encouraging to see an officer there. It speaks a lot of the safety. It speaks a lot to what we put into this district, to be able to collaborate with the Stayton police like that. It's very helpful for us just to know our kids are safe and to know that schools are safe places where they can get their education. And again, thank you for your time. Are there any questions from City Council?
Thank you.
Of course.
Laura, quick question. Does everybody get the same amount of playing time on high school teams?
No,
No?
high school, it's, the intent is to
There's hope for you, Hank.
Yeah, well. Young student representative, how many, if you've got command of some of these numbers, how many ninth graders did they lose this first semester?
Oh, I don't have that.
This is when you lose them as ninth graders.
we are 89% on track to graduate at our freshman level.
So there's 10%,
11% lost.
11% not making it.
And then they've instituted something this year called winter school. So for 2 weeks after the semester ends, they are determining when they're doing some catch-up to try to change any failing grade to a passing grade within that 2-week period, and that grade will get backdated to.
So that's just going on now then?
Yes.
So just finished it.
There's also like summer school during the summer where they can take basically their whole schedule during the summer. Over
good.
like a 3-week period, it's kind of just like catching them up and getting them back on track. So there's systems to get them back on where they need to be. They're not like gone. They don't have a chance now. It's not like that. They've still got plenty of opportunities to get back on where they need to be. And like I said, our dropout prevention specialist is partly there to do that.
And focused on those ninth graders?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Can I add one thing?
Go ahead.
Because this has been a concerted effort to improve the students on track. We want students across the district, of course, but the high school is critical, very highly critical point. I wanted to point out that this young man also has put together a tutoring program that he is working on offering in the high school. So it's definitely a community, adult to students kind of effort.
Good deal, all right. Thank you. Thank you much. Anyone else? Okay, let's go on. Jana, electronic reader board. Here we go. Stayton Library. Ms. Mosier, you're on.
Mayor and Council, I'm here tonight to let you know that the library's electronic reader board project has been completed. It's a project that the Friends of the Library started in 1415, and it is complete. So the purpose of this project was to retrofit the existing reader board with an electronic one, allowing the city and other community organizations to better inform the public about community events. So the old reader board displayed a message every 2 weeks from one organization. Messages had to be changed manually. Groups would send someone, or maybe draw straws, to put the message up with the 12-foot ladder and a pole, or maybe a smaller ladder on the back of a pickup truck. all which can be fairly precarious, especially in bad weather. The new reader board will display a message every 8 seconds. So many organizations can have messages up at the same time. The messages are managed by a computer inside the library, so the ladder and the pole can be officially retired. The Stayton Friends of the Library raised roughly $18,000 with the amazing help of our community. The Friends also covered the costs of additional electrical upgrades that needed to be done before the installation of the sign was completed. We're really excited to have the reader board project complete, and we want to thank all of our community supporters for their help. I hope that you guys saw the list of people who donated that we played for the first about a week and a half that the reader board was lit, because without them, we would not have been able to complete this project. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Anything else going on at the library? Or are you gonna
Lots
cover
of
that?
things going on at the library.
You're going to cover that in your section.
Okay, thank you, Jana. That's a real treat to have that finally done. Yeah. One more project. Okay, let's go to, if there's nothing else under presentations, let's go to consent agenda for January 16th.
Mr. Mayor, I move you accept the consent agenda as written.
Okay. I have a motion. Is there a second? To approve the consent agenda as published and distributed and carefully read.
I'll second it.
And a second. Thank you. Everyone's seen the item. Would all in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing no opposition, we'll declare the motion passed and the consent agenda approved as presented. The next thing are a couple of appointments. Under business from the chair, committee and commission appointments. Ms. Paige Hook, where did you go? I saw her. She left. Appointment to the Budget Committee and Planning Commission. We have a vacancy there, both places. And then a committee and commission reappointment, Public Safety Commission, Carrie Sessions from Covered Bridge Cafe and other places. So, oh, there she is. I knew I'd seen you. Paige, you have you want to be on two things. Budget Committee doesn't take very long.
That's why.
A few meetings. The Planning Commission's a little bit longer. Does everyone know this young lady? Huh? Everyone knows who she is? Huh? And she lives in town. She works. You work in Salem. You work for the state. And raising 3 little guys and gals, like 2 of each, 1 of each, 2 of it. Must be more than 1 of each. There's a couple of boys and maybe a girl in there somewhere. Okay. But I would ask the council's approval of those appointments, please.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Were there any questions for Paige?
Just if Hank's.
I urged her to run for one of the open council seats this fall, and so I hope she will. So, good deal. And Carrie's not here this evening. I don't see her anyway. So we'll go to, we don't have any public hearings, and there's no unfinished business, so new business, Pacific Core franchise hearing, and Mr. Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the record, my name is Wally Lean. I'm special counsel for the city. And we're here tonight to make a decision on the interpretation and application of the electrical franchise between the city and Pacific Core. The process that this hearing. It's not a land use hearing, so it's a little bit different kind of a process. So in my staff report, I've laid it out, and Lance and I will bring you up to speed on where we are at this point, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask us questions. And then there will be a presentation by Pacific Corp. Ms. McGarr is here, and she will make her presentation. Then there will be opportunity for us to have rebuttal, and then finally for you to ask any questions and make your final decision. So that's sort of the way this plays out. It's not the formalities of a land use hearing. It's a specialized kind of a hearing that is provided for in the franchise agreement when there are disputes as to the application of the franchise. The city believes that the Pacific Corp is required to move at their expense a series of 10 power poles from Shaft Road up the Kendall Way right-of-way pursuant to the language of the franchise agreement, and they don't agree. And so what we're here today, you are the final arbiter of the interpretation of the franchise agreement. So ultimately, you will decide how this matter is going to shake out after you've heard staff and you've heard Mr. Gare. So with that, I want to turn it over to Lance to give you the Public Works perspective and how we got here today.
Thank you, Wally. Members of the council, Mr. Mayor, I want to start off by giving you a brief history of this project and what brought us to this, where we are at today. Long before I got here, the city entered into a memo of understanding with the Water Control District for us to go find suitable land for a stormwater detention facility. Since I've gotten here, we've looked at several places. In the summer of 2015, we identified the Lambert facility, the Lambert property, as being an area that might feasibly house a stormwater detention facility. We hired geotechnical engineers to go set piezometers in the ground to see where the groundwater levels were. Since that time, in the fall, in December of 2016, it came back from the geotechnical engineers that this property was suitable for a regional detention facility. We entered into a contract with Keller Design to design the detention facility in December of 2016. The city entered into, we also purchased the property, the Lambert property, in December 2016. In 2016, the Lambert property was also partitioned into 2 parcels. The parcels were dedicated, and when we partitioned that property, the city dedicated 35 additional feet of the Lambert property to dedicate it to this Kendall Way right-of-way. Because Kendall Way is shown as a major collector street on our transportation plan. And I just want to start off by giving you a little bit of background on that. Since then, the city's been planning and implementing this new storm drainage facility and street widening project of Kendall Way. As you've known, when we last year at this time, a developer came in and brought before council and the planning commission a new 50-lot subdivision that's going to be built on the north side of, or the south side of the Lambert property. At that time, we had numerous people from that Quail Run development in here complaining about traffic issues. The city undertook that. We hired AKS Engineering to widen Kendall Way, to design plans to widen Kendall Way, to provide 6-foot sidewalks to get pedestrians off Kendall Way and make Kendall Way a 36-foot wide road. Early on in that design process, designers and staff identified that we had certain Pacific power poles in the street right-of-way. I think Wally pointed out we have 10 poles. Pole number 1 is at the intersection of Kendall Way and Shaft Road. It's actually in the county right-of-way. It's a high voltage power pole. Any kind of improvements we make to Kendall Way and Shaft Road is going to require this high voltage pole to be moved. The county is working with us on that. They've seen the plans for Kendall Way. They're going to look to us for guidance on how we want that road built. Poles 2 through 10 are located on Kendall Way. And they're just regular power poles. They'll be required to move because Kendall Way currently is a 24-foot road, and we need a 36-foot road in there. If you look at Exhibit B, it's at the end of your these supplementals. It shows you a cross-section of Kendall Way, how it is to be built. If you see that right-of-way, you can see it's a 36-foot road, curb to curb. The utility poles where they sit today are anywhere but 4 to 6 feet in the road. So they need to be moved to get out of the Kendall Way Road. It's just simple as that. The current project planning requires pole 1 to be moved to the northeast. The remaining poles can be just moved to the east. We'll work with the Pacific Power to find the right location. The city will have the responsibility of trenching and laying the vaults, conduit, and power lines underground, but it's the responsibility of Pacific Corp to remove the poles, run the wire inside the conduit, and make the electrical connections. The city's underground obligation is part of the project budget and we paid for by the city's transportation SDCs. The city plans on constructing a joint trench for the franchise utilities so they can all put their conduit in one trench down Kendall Way to make it easy for everybody to put their utility. That means SCTC, they've already got their design pretty much done. Northwest Natural Gas has their design done and ready to go. They're just waiting on us to give them to go ahead to do it, but we can't do it because Pacific Power is saying no, they won't move their poles at their cost. That leaves me to where we're at today and looking at the franchise agreement. Wally, do you want to take this, or do you want me to keep going, or regarding the franchise agreement itself?
Yeah, I'll take care of that. I wanted you to make sure that all the facts were clear.
Okay.
Thank you, Lance. The record for you to consider includes the staff report, and attached to the staff report is the actual franchise agreement itself for you to be able to look at. It also includes the Exhibit B map, which will give you the location of the poles that are involved. Pole number 1, which actually straddles the Kendall Way right-of-way and the Shaft Road right-of-way, as you can see on Exhibit B, is a high voltage pole, and it gets treated differently than the other regular poles. And so that's a little bit of a distinction that we'll have. The other poles, the franchise agreement provides that we can move those and charge it back to Pacific Corp, but not the high voltage pole. Other arrangements from appropriate electricians or something has to be made for pole number 1.
So Wally, what is the cost of pole number 1 versus poles 2 through 10?
You want me to answer that, Wally?
Yeah, it's about between $75,000 and $100,000 for pole number 1, and for 2 through 10, it's about $165,000 to $170,000 total. So you've got about $55,000 to move the other 9 poles. You see, there's a big difference.
Well, yeah, the HV is going to be hugely different.
High value pole. On Exhibit B, you'll notice the cross-section that Lance has provided you that shows in the city right-of-way on Kendall Road. You see where the existing pole is, almost in the middle of the right-of-way at the bottom. The record also will include a January 30th memo from Ms. McGarr, as well as a January 5th memo from Ms. McGarr. And that, together with the testimony that you'll hear today, will comprise the record upon which you will be allowed to decide this case.
Wally, do we take into account the franchise agreement that we've been given as well?
Yes. Yeah, it's Exhibit A to the staff report. And basically, what the staff is urging upon the council, the primary section is 4.12.040, which is on page 8 of the franchise agreement. And it talks about the relocation of facilities, and it treats different classifications of relocation differently. So, for example, the folks who are developing the front side of the Lambert property are private developers, and poles that might have to be moved because of their new development. PP&L does not have to move those at their expense. That's moved by the private developer. The critical passage for our position is that when you have a city-initiated project, then that burden shifts. And then the city, when it's a city-initiated project using city funds for city purposes, then PP&L, by virtue of this agreement, has agreed to bear the cost of moving the poles. So our position is this is a contract matter. And when this contract was entered into, PP&L made an agreement. You've got a city project, using city funds for the city benefit, then we'll move those poles for you. That's a part of the consideration of us being allowed to use your rights of way. That's what this is about. If it's some other project, then no. City has to pay it, or the property owner has to pay it, not PP&L. And all of those rights are spelled out in 4.12.040 under relocation. And again, it's our position that this is a contract matter. Contract says PP&L has to do it this way, and they don't want to do it this way, and we believe that when they say they don't want to do it that way, that's a breach of this agreement. And you've had the staff report. I don't want to belabor that, but I did want to talk for a minute about the fiscal impact. You've already asked about the cost. It's about $165,000 total. Potential cost to move all 10 poles.
Wally, let me correct you on that.
Okay.
Total cost would be anywhere from $240,000 to $265,000 to move all 10 poles. The city would be responsible for $55,000 of that for undergrounding the power along Kendall Way, which is something that the city administration, we've decided that we want to do, is to have underground power along the detention facility and the new Mill Creek Park.
Let me, Lance and Wally, that 55,000 is also the exact same number you said for the poles 2 through 10?
Yeah, I just misread my
I think he
report.
just misread that.
So poles 2 through 10 are essentially off the issue?
Counselor,
Yeah.
get up close to this, please.
So poles, we've already agreed to work with poles 2 through 10 as an underground?
Let me clear that up. Okay, pole number 1 is going to cost anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 to move. That's what I've been told by
Pole number
Pacific.
1.
Pole number 1. Pole number 2 through 10 is $165,000 to move those poles. That's what I've been told by Pacific Power in an email from Eddie Steiner, who works for them. So the total cost being anywhere between $240,000 to $265,000. In the process of this, I've asked for a price to underground the power along Kendall Way. And I've been told it would cost us $55,000 for all the conduit and having them come out and pull the wires and attach the wires, and hook up the electrical wires in the vaults and so forth. So it cost us $55,000, and we've agreed, internally we've agreed, okay, $55,000, that sounds reasonable.
So that gets rid of poles 2 through 10?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would.
Pole number 1 is the only one we care about.
No, you're not correct. They
Okay.
still have to move the wires.
But they're
It's still going to
conduit.
cost them, it's to relocate that, they're going to have to reposition those wires. That's what I've been told. Okay, to underground that at a different location. They can't underground right where they're at because it's in the middle of the road. They would underground them somewhere in backside of the sidewalk. They'd have to underground them there, and that's where we're building our joint trench. We'd go out and we'd put the conduit in the ground, the vaults. They would pull the wires through there.
It's the same trench for SETC and everybody else?
Yes,
Yeah.
it'd be a joint utility trench. That's what I'm planning on doing.
And removing the poles.
And removing the poles.
Yeah.
And that was the cost that I was given, $165,000 to do that. So,
Pole number 1, being the high voltage pole, is not intended to be underground.
Yeah, no, they can't be.
It will be
Yeah, that's-
moved
that's-
over to the corner of that development property.
Sure, they're two separate issues. You have pole number one and the other poles, whether we underground them or what the
So
cost is.
I would like to briefly go on a little bit about that. I know Wally was going to, but if the decision is made, the Pacific Corp must move the poles, there's no fiscal impact to the city other than the undergrounding of $55,000, which we've agreed to. But if the decision is made that implied the exemption of the franchise agreement to exempt the compliance when the poles were located in a prior easement, then the fiscal impact to the city would be $240,000 to $265,000 we'd have to pay for. It'd come right out of our transportation SDCs, which it's about 30% of what we have in there now, which would just about eliminate this project completely. So I just want you guys to be aware of that. It's a big hit. That is all I have, and I think the remedies are next.
Yeah, and Ms. McGarr will provide you with PP&L's argument. Their argument is the general rule of law is that they don't have to move them, and though their poles were situated in a prior private easement. I'll let her go through that, but it's a two-sided argument, obviously. It's not one-sided. That's why she's here, and she'll present her side for you. The remedies that we have laid out for you, including revoke and terminate the franchise agreement, and we're certainly not arguing for that. In lieu of revocation, the city has the ability to assess penalties for their intransience, as we believe it to be, because this process really started, in June of last year?
Yes,
and
that's
we're losing valuable time in completing this project by arguing about who's going to move the poles. In number C, the city can mandate Pacific Corp to move pole number 1, but not underground it. But you can then mandate that the poles 2 through 10 be underground. And given our new construction schedule for street improvements, we are proposing that move be done no later than June 1st of 2018. And we understand the city is up and running and able to do all of its undergrounding activities to meet that schedule as well. And then option D is the city can elect to undertake the move of the poles 2 through 10 yourself and then assess that back against PP&L. But we can't do that as to pole number 1. Staff recommendation is that you determine that PP&L entered into a franchise agreement, which is tantamount to a contract. In the contract, they agreed to move the poles when it's a city-initiated and funded project, which this obviously is, and that they be required to move the poles. And we have provided you with 2 options. The first one is the one that's proposed by staff. The second one is the one, obviously, that will be proposed by PP&L or some alternative. I understand Ms. McGarr may have some alternative language for that. Staff believes the proper interpretation of the contract is that when this is a city project, PP&L contracted away the general rules of law that they don't have to pay for it when it's in a private easement. They agreed to move them under any circumstances. There's no exemption in our franchise agreement for grandfather rights or for prior easement rights. The franchise agreement in its 4 corners clearly provides that they have to move the poles under these circumstances. So with that, I think we could invite Ms. McGarr to address council and advise of PP&L's position.
Actually, I'm going to start. My name is Alan Meyer. I live at 2764 East Pine Street here in Stayton. I work at 525 Wilco Road here in Stayton. I'm the Director of Customer and Community Affairs for Pacific Power, and I'm responsible for the southern half of our communities from the Mid-Willamette Valley down to Northern California. In Pacific Power, we serve parts of Washington, Oregon, and California in the Northwest. Pacific Corp rolls up to, or Pacific Power rolls up to Pacific Corp, in which we serve 6 states, and then we roll up to Berkshire Hathaway Energy, where we serve over 11 million customers in the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. And before we get into the details of the matter, I want to hit a few key points because Mr. McGarr certainly is the expert in this issue. But we at Pacific Power are stewards of our ratepayers' money. Rates have been flat for several years, and we intend to keep them that way. And one way we do that is making sure that we only pay for what we're supposed to pay for. Facilities agreements in every community that we serve pertain only to facilities in which we do not have private rights. These facilities, we have private rights. Only for facilities that our communities are allowing, and the key word is allowing, for us to occupy the public right-of-way. So, and for that, we share a portion of our revenue, which equates, for 2017, the city of Stayton about $585,000 is what we paid for the city of Stayton to allow us to operate in their public right-of-way. The city of Stayton is the only city in my time with Pacific Power that's asking us to give up our private property rights. With this interpretation of our facilities agreement, the city could tell us to move our substation on Shaft Road at our expense, or our business continuity facility, which is my office on Wilco Road, at our expense. This is not a good precedent, and one that I'm not sure that we've ever faced before as a company. Bottom line, if all our facilities were on private easements and private property in Stayton, we would not need a franchise agreement to operate in Stayton, and we would have the right to be there as opposed to the city allowing us to be there. The final thought before I turn this over to our legal counsel is we were there first on Kindle Way before there was a Kindle Way. All of those facilities were placed on private easements in the 1960s, and those easements still stand. Even if the city were to move the poles, those easements would still stand. Of course, we will work with the city to relocate our facilities on Kindle Way, but because we have the right to be there, we are not going to charge our ratepayers for the cost to move those facilities. Again, this is inconsistent with every single community that we serve, with no exception. No community has ever asked us, as far as I know, for us to pay to move our facilities that we have private rights on. I'm going to turn it over to Kim.
Good evening. I have, and Wally's gonna, this isn't my venue. Good evening. As you've all heard, I'm Kim McGarr. I'm an attorney for Pacificor. And Wally's probably gonna correct me if I'm wrong. I have a few other just kind of maps and demonstrative documents I'd like to share with the council if that's permissible.
Yeah, perfectly okay.
Perfect.
Just identify them for the record so
Okay.
we have a good recording.
I have a copy for Steve, so I've probably just, and then I'll read into the record what all these things are once we get there. Microphone here. So what I've handed you, there's 4 documents. The first is just a map that we created just to help give everybody sort of a graphic of what we're talking about. The second document is a recorded 1970 survey for Louis Kindle, and that sort of long corridor you see there. The 29.7 feet is the Kindle Way that we're talking about. The third document is a partition plat from the 1990s for the B.F. Lambert estate, and this one is useful in that it has Kindle Way labeled on it and identifies it as a private road, even back in as late as 1990. And then the final document is the warranty deed by which Kirk Kindle actually conveyed Kindle Way to the city in 2009. And you can see the legal description refers to the 29.7 feet. You'll see that sort of pass through all these documents. Kindle Way is 29.7 feet wide and has been since the 1960s. And then Exhibit B, for those of you who are obviously familiar with the community, you can see that's Kindle Road, so or Kindle Way. So that's what I've handed you, and I'll talk about those documents in a bit. So backing up, I want to begin by thanking you for the opportunity to address the council about this important matter. I also want to make sure that I answer your questions first and foremost. You have a lot of material in front of you. A lot of it I've written. I'm not going to go through case law in immense detail. It's sort of a strange thing for you all have to dig through. So the most important thing for me is that I answer whatever questions you have about the company's position. And again, I want to start with the idea of what we're talking about here is not just contractual rights, it's real property rights. That's really what we're here, that's really what the company's position is based on. And for those of you who have any background in real property, you know that our system is really based on first in time, first in right. Everything that we do with real property in this country going back hundreds of years is about that idea, first in time, first in right. And it's reinforced with recording systems where we record what our rights are with respect to real property so that everybody knows what those are. And the senior recorded right wins. That's just black letter property law. Oregon's recording system requires, the statutes are cited in the letter I sent last week, requires that all conveyances of property be in writing, that they be recorded, that they contain language of conveyance in order to be valid. That's what our system is based on. And as utility companies like Pacific Power built out their electrical grid over the last 100+ years, they relied on this entire system of first in time, first in right, recorded real property conveyances and so forth to establish their system. And they paid consideration for those rights. So where they got a private easement, and honestly, they didn't always get a private easement, but where they did, they paid some amount of consideration for that. And if you think of the company's ratepayers as this historical conglomeration of people, the ratepayers of Pacific Power have paid for these rights, and they paid for them a long time ago. So the advent of franchises, again, goes back, as you can see in the case law, it's really very interesting, but again, goes back hundreds of years in this country. As we developed the land, as cities began to build out their streets, it made so much sense for the utilities to go, and it used to be steam pipes and gas lines, and you can see the advent train lines, to put those in the same place as the roads. It made perfect sense. And usually this was a handshake deal, and then it became an issue when the city wanted to widen the road or the city wanted to do something. And it goes all the way back to the Supreme Court back in Louisiana a long time ago, where the court said, well, once you're in the right-of-way, you have a right to stay there forever, but not in the exact same place if you're there only because the city has allowed you to be there. And from that point forward, this idea of franchise law and how franchises work and the interplay between legal rights and franchise rights has developed. And again, that's all laid out in a lot of detail in the memo I sent last week, the January 30th. So ultimately, and I don't believe this is disputed at all by the city's attorney, the black letter law on this issue is that when a utility puts their facilities in a public road right-of-way by grant of authority from the public body, and that public body later wants to widen the road, whatever they want to do. Public body wants to do something for the public benefit with respect to that road, utility has to move, and the utility has to move at their expense. No dispute, that is the black letter law. But the contrary of that is also true, which is where the utility was there first, and the utility was not there by grant of authority from the public body, then the utility doesn't have to pay to move. And again, there's a variety of cases cited that address this very specific, exact same set of circumstances over and over again across the country, where the utility was there, just like Pacific Power is in this case, by private right of easement. The city came in later. Oftentimes it is because there's a private road or a private driveway, and the lines ran up the private road, but then the city comes in, or the county or the state or whoever it is, and they take over that road right of way, and then they say, okay, well, we want to widen it, you need to move your facilities. And the courts say, not if those rights were first granted by a private right. And it makes sense, because the quid pro quo, and I think Mr. Lean and I agree on this point. He said part of the consideration for us using your right-of-way is you have to move. Absolutely agree. But here, Pacific Power isn't using the right-of-way. The right-of-way came over on top of Pacific Power's rights, and that's what you see with these documents I've handed you today. The city didn't have any rights in Kindle Way until 2009. PacifiCorp had been there since 1965. So it is the city's rights that have come on top of PacifiCorp's rights, and they're subordinate to PacifiCorp's rights. And I'm sorry, I represented PacifiCorp for a long time, so I say PacifiCorp instead of Pacific Power, but they're the same thing, and I'll try to refer to that correctly. So again, as franchise, to kind of wrap that up with respect to franchises, over time, they came not from this sort of body law. We all started to negotiate these written agreements, which is what we have with the city of Stayton, and utilities, both Pacific Power and PGE and all sorts of other utilities have with cities and counties all over the state, is these franchise agreements that set forth the quid pro quo of that relationship. You can be in our streets, you'll pay us some money for that, a percentage of revenues, and you have to move if we ask you to. And that's where we stand. But that requirement is triggered on the fact that that the utility is using the right of way. And where the utility is not using the right of way, then the franchise agreement doesn't apply. So again, with this backdrop in mind, let's turn to Kindle Way in particular. We've attached in my initial materials, there's a copy of the 1964 easement from William Rauscher, and he granted Pacific Power a 29.7 foot wide easement all the way up Kendall Road in 1964. Presumably there was a house up there, they wanted electricity, there's the quid pro quo. You give us an easement and we give you electricity. And that's likely what happened. That's usually what happened. So PacifiCorp placed its facilities right then in 1965, and they've been there ever since. And again, then we see over time, Kindle Way was a private road owned by those individuals that owned property up there. In 1970, it looks like it was owned by Louis Kindle. 1990, we have a partition plat, shows it to be a private road. Additional subdivisions were platted on the west side, and there were some vacation or some right-of-way granted in those. But again, all of those come on top of PacifiCorp's right, which lays at the bottom and in the most senior position. So bottom line is that, PacifiCorp's position is that its easement rights are senior to any rights that the city has as a pure property matter. And it's analogous to if we own the road. I mean, if you sort of back up and say, well, because easements sometimes are hard to get your brain around. Let's say Pacific Power owns Kindle Way. We would all, sort of you intuitively know as a public body, if there's a property owner who owns land and you want to expand your road onto that land, you have to buy it, condemn it, you have to somehow get title to it. That's the same case here. An easement is just, in law school we talk about, we learn about property law as this bundle of sticks and you have all these various rights. Well, an easement is just one of those bundle of sticks, but it's no different than a fee title right. That easement is there. It hasn't been conveyed, it hasn't been terminated, nothing's happened to it. It's still there. Even if the franchise agreement applied and Pacific Power had to relocate its poles, its easement is still where you want to put the road. And you can't violate that. You can't take that away just because you want to. You have to buy it or convey it or negotiate it. And Pacific Power isn't asking for some rich concession for that. It's not even asking for any value for its easement rights. It simply is asking that the city pay the cost of relocation, and that the city give it the equivalent rights that it has when it moves its poles to wherever the city wants them to be. So, and the similar fact, so that really applies to poles 2 through 10. The pole, what staff calls pole 1, is down in a separate easement from Lambert. It's in that little red box on the map, if that, just so you know. But it's exact same set of circumstances. We got it in 1965. It's still there. The city right away also came on top of that right. Turning to the franchise agreement itself, again, there's no dispute about what it says, and there's no question that if we were here talking about poles that Pacific Power had put in the road right-of-way, after it was a road right-of-way because the city said we could, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having this discussion. We would be moving. I've attached to my other letters, again, cities all over, cities, counties, the state, all over Oregon have all these same franchise agreements. We go through this same discussion. When they want to move, the first question is, where are your poles? Are they in a private easement? Okay, now the public body needs to talk about how to pay the costs. Are they in a public right-of-way? Okay, great, we can force you to move. And in my January 30th materials, just by way of example, I gave you ODOT's process. They have a whole process by which, and they recognize this, if ODOT wants to expand its road into the private easement right, then you tell it you're in my private easement, they pay the cost of relocation, and they give you something called an X permit, which is what, if they want to move again and you hold an X permit, ODOT knows that means we have to pay for the cost of relocation. So this is not, this is just sort of long recognized practice. I think if you look at the franchise agreement itself, it further supports our interpretation and conclusion. 4.12020 provides what the franchise agreement does, which is a grant of authority to install, maintain, and operate on or under the streets, bridges, and public places approved by the city for the transmission and distribution of electricity. Well, that shows that this is a forward-going looking right, and clearly we didn't put our poles here because the city told us to. They were there long before the city had any interest whatsoever in Kindle Road. Again, the compensation component further supports the conclusion. That is a quid pro quo. Pacific Power pays a percentage of revenue in order to be on the city's public property rights. And again, without that public property right piece, then the franchise agreement just simply doesn't apply to circumstances where the utility isn't in its facilities or isn't in the public right-of-way by grant of public authority. Finally, I think a couple things I want to mention that were in some of the other materials. There's been reference to the other utilities and what they're doing or not doing. I don't know all the details of the other utilities. I do know, for the telephone company at least has told us they don't have private easement rights. They're in a different situation than we are. And you know, PacifiCorp, as Alan has said, PacifiCorp recognizes the need and the desire to do the public work that you all want to do, or the city wants to do on Kindle Way. We support that, and they're not looking for some sort of payday. They just simply, the reality is that PacifiCorp has a duty to protect its ratepayers' money. And there isn't some, giant pool of cash that they can use to pay this relocation cost. If Pacific Power were forced to do this, the ratepayers pay for it. And they must be good stewards of the ratepayers' money. And when the ratepayers, now they were ratepayers 40 years ago, but when those ratepayers 40 years ago have already paid for these easement rights, they don't have to pay for them again. So, I know it's getting late. I don't want to go too long. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about the materials in my letters or anything that I've said. Or
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question.
Counselor, go ahead, please.
Kim, Lance said that the current location of pole number 1 is in the county right-of-way. Do you guys support that?
if it is because the county road right-of-way came in, I believe, in 1998 above PacifiCorp's, but junior to PacifiCorp's rights.
Okay, so if the county made the same argument, would you take the same position?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, because the county got its, I believe it's 1998 that the county got its road right-of-way easement for pole number 1. So it was 30 years after.
Okay.
Pacific
So
Power.
you would have the same position that the county asked?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Kimberly, looks like the city authority to manage local rights-of-way and charge utilities for the use of the rights-of-way go back to the Oregon State Legislature in 1911 and 1931 ruling allowing a tax. In addition, there's some case law here about easements being transferred from private individuals to public and relocation of them. I mean, it seems like in 1911 and 1931 that certainly predates any discussion over Kindle Way. If in 1931 the Oregon State Legislature said that the easements, the city has the right to tell easement holders what they need to do.
And I don't know exactly which case you're talking about. I can tell you,
It's on Oregon, League of Oregon Cities.
I mean, whether the city may have authority to, they have condemnation authority if nothing else. They have the authority to force utilities to move. The question is, who pays for it?
Seems pretty clear in the League of Oregon Cities and the law of easements under, I was talking about this because somebody asked, and I had to ask Lance earlier today, so I did some research in Veranzo versus Carpenter and a couple other ones that there's some good case law saying that once the city, acting in good faith, acquires an easement, the city is the owner of that easement, and the city can acquire or ask you guys as people who have that easement to do what you need to do to make that easement viable in the future.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that case. I'd be happy to review it and address it later. I guess what I would say in this circumstance is the city hasn't acquired Pacific Power's easement. Pacific Power continues to hold that easement, and certainly if the city condemned it or it was conveyed voluntarily, that would apply. But in this circumstance, Pacific Power still has its 1965 easement and nothing's happened to it. It hasn't been conveyed or condemned by the city in any way. So I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that exact case to address it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very nicely done, even if it is on the other side. Let's see, questions of Pacific Corp by council, rebuttal by staff. Mr. Lane.
Thank you, Your Honor. There's a couple of factual things that I want to point out. There's been talk about how PP&L paid for these easements, and the ratepayers have done that over the years. But the materials that were submitted to you all show these road easements where the consideration is none. So they were all granted without a cash payment. There may have been some other consideration, but all of the documents that were submitted all show that the consideration for those easements is none. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you, in the warranty deed provided where Kindle granted the city the right-of-way, if you look at the warranty deed, there's no exception for the prior PP&L easement. So the city didn't take it subject to the PP&L. The city took it as a warranty deed, fee title, not subject to PP&L's easement. So the fact that they're relying on an underlying easement when Kindle granted this warranty deed to the city took it not subject to the PP&L easement. The idea that the underlying easements are still valid and they provide an exception to the franchise agreement that is not written in the franchise agreement, but somehow, because they existed in the past, give them a pass on paying the $200,000 or whatever it is for moving the poles. If those easements don't exist, then that argument doesn't apply. And I would argue until I'm green in the face as a 40-year land use lawyer that these underlying easements have been abandoned. There is no more easement left. They granted the easement for the right to have the poles. Then the land upon which the easement existed was granted to the city as right-of-way. So what is the value? What is the purpose? What is the usefulness of those underlying easements? There is none. And Oregon law of easements provides that those easements, therefore, are abandoned and terminated. So the whole idea that this private right gives them a pass doesn't fly when you really peel the edges off the lemon or the skin off the onion. It just doesn't hold up. Now, I understand the argument that this is real property rights and not franchise rights, but I take big exception to that. This is a contract. We're not arguing about real property rights. We're talking about a contract. And people can contract away their real property rights, and they do it every day. When you borrow money from the bank, you contract away part of your rights. That bundle of sticks Kim was talking about, you contract away one of those. You want to say, well, I got the fee title to this thing subject to the mortgage, so bank, you go away. Your doesn't apply to me because I've got this right. Because you've got the prior right, doesn't matter. So what our position as a staff is that the general rule, and we don't, as Ms. McGarr indicated to you, we understand what the general rule is. The general rule is as she explained it. This isn't about the general rule. The general rule came into effect years and years ago. This franchise came into effect in 2011. Everybody knew what the general rule was, yet they contracted for a franchise agreement that said, under these particular circumstances, general rule doesn't apply anymore. You got to pay. That's part of the consideration for entering into that franchise agreement. If the parties who entered into that negotiation and signed that agreement would have said, general rule applies, there would be no need for that provision in the contract. Or, alternatively, there would be an exception specifically written into the franchise agreement that says, hey folks, there's a general rule out there and this franchise doesn't apply under these circumstances. But neither one of those two things exist in this franchise agreement in 2011. It contracted away the general rule. The general rule no longer applies to the city of Stayton because we contracted it and we have language that requires them to do something. And I don't care what ODOT does. I don't care what Lafayette or any other city or county does. And you can give me all the ODOT manuals you want, but we're not ODOT, we're not Lafayette, we're not Silverton. We have our own agreement, and our agreement is specific, and it's undoubtedly different from all these other agreements. And that's our pitch. There's some technical stuff I want to just briefly hit. There was an argument about just compensation in the written materials, and I do want to point out that our position is this isn't a just compensation case. It's not a just compensation argument because PP&L was granted the right to use, and part of the consideration was the terms and conditions of the franchise agreement. So there's nothing about a taking in this. The taking was giving up and negotiating the general rule right when they signed the franchise agreement. We already talked about the abandonment of the easement, and the grandfather right sort of fits in with the same argument. Because the poles were there in that location doesn't give them a grandfather right, whether it's by easement or by the general rule of vesting and non-conforming uses. Again, if there was to be a grandfather right, when you take the franchise and you negotiate the terms and conditions of the franchise, if that's something PP&L needed to have in there, it needed to be negotiated. And the city didn't agree to that, apparently, because it's not in there. So therefore, the grandfather right argument doesn't really apply in this case as well. I guess in closing, I'd just like to remind you that Section 412.0303 sub 4 of the franchise agreement provides that where it is a city project that causes the PP&L to have to move the poles that are in the right-of-way, doesn't matter how the poles got there, PP&L can be reimbursed the cost of moving the poles from the ratepayers. So this isn't a PP&L thing. I mean, it doesn't come out of PP&L's coffers pursuant to OAR 860.22.0046. If this is a financial burden for them, there's a method for them to get reimbursed from the ratepayers of the affected area. I think that is all I have. I think the bottom line is staff believes that there is a franchise agreement that clearly provides the outcome, and we would urge you to adopt the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. We're at the point of deliberation by council on this. Wow. So.
Mr. Mayor,
Who wants to start? Brian?
I do have one question for Wally, if I could. Wally, do you know what takes place before, on this warranty deed, before the city accepts it? Do they do some kind of easement search or lien, property lien or anything like that?
I am not, I wasn't involved in this in 2009. So, you know, typically there is a title search.
You couldn't take it as a lien.
Well, we could. Yeah, routinely when there are other easements and we're accepting a plat or an easement or right-of-way where the electrical line or the sewer line or the water line's already there, we will take it subject to that. But in this particular case, on this warranty deed from Kindle to the city, there is no exception. And our position is that had the city acquired the property subject to the PP&L lien, that we might have a different story. I don't believe so, but it's moot because it doesn't.
And that's why I'm asking, because it's not spelled out in the deed.
It's not in the deed.
May I address that? I don't know if I'm out of order, but, okay.
You could do whatever the mayor will allow you to do, Kim.
Excellent, okay. I guess all I would say is whether Mr. Kindle, it doesn't look like a title search was done. It doesn't look like that sort of deed. It wasn't professionally, I'm not sure what happened to it, but it doesn't really matter. The fact is that we have given you the easement by which Pacificor acquired that right. There's a map to that easement. It shows that 29.7 feet. And I don't know if Mr. Kindle didn't know about it or no one cared, but Mr. Kindle can't convey Pacificor's rights or terminate those rights or anything. So even if he didn't accept out that easement, he conveyed it subject to that because Pacificor's right to that property pre-existed Mr. Kindle's right to that property. So as far as I know, that deed, and the only reason I offered it was to show that is the only deed by which the city has acquired any rights to this 29.7 feet, and it didn't happen until 2009. If the city knows of an earlier right, I'm happy to look at it, but I think that's all there is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, other questions, folks?
I do have more questions. Let me find it here. How do I ask this one?
I have one other question, and I'm certainly not an attorney or don't know why, but if Mr. Kindle gave away the right to your 29 feet, why didn't you come forward then and say, oh, just a minute, you can't, Mr. Kindle can't give this to the city because we have rights to 29 feet?
Well, first of all, Pacificor would have no way of knowing. I mean, he granted a deed to the city. We're not a party to that process, so we would have no way of knowing that.
Does that mean that you don't legally have any rights on that 29 feet?
No, it's like I could sign a deed today. I don't know if you're a homeowner, but I could sign a deed to your house, and I could record it in the real property records. It's meaningless, but I can do it. It's like that. So Mr. Kindle signed a deed. It probably should have been a quitclaim deed, honestly, as opposed to a warranty deed, and people get those forms mixed up. But he can convey, the effect of his deed is to convey what he had. And he held the property subject to Pacificor's pre-existing right. So he conveyed whatever he had. And it's the same as, you know, if you convey your house and you've got a utility easement or you have a road easement, you always convey it subject to those, and we usually get title insurance and they're all listed out. But regardless, you can only ever convey what you have. And so what Mr. Kindle had in 2009 was, assuming he owned it, was the right to that 29.7 feet subject to all pre-existing rights, whatever they were. And he had no right to convey PacifiCorp's, right? So he conveyed it to the city subject to whether it says that or not.
But the easement that's on my property actually is part of the deed. I mean, if I were to try and convey my property to you, it would tell you that there's an easement on there.
Right, but sometimes they aren't part of the deed. Sometimes easements are reserved in deeds, sometimes they're separate like they are in this case. They can be all sorts of different things, but I think even Mr. Lean would agree with me that at the end of the day, any property owner can only convey what they have, regardless of what they say in the deed. And at that point, he only, again, I don't think there's any legal dispute about this, he only had the property subject to whatever easements. There may be easements other than ours, I don't know, but whatever easements pre-existed his interest in the property. Normally, we're in sort of a condemnation process, and people have gotten title reports, and we have sort of a full list of everything that's been recorded. We don't have that, but we do have, proof that PacifiCorp's easement was recorded in 1965, and I'm not sure why Mr. Kendall conveyed the property in the way that he did. I interpret that to be more of a quitclaim deed, which is I'm conveying whatever rights I have, whatever they are, as opposed to a warranty deed, because it's unlikely there weren't some other type of encumbrances, frankly, on that 29.7 feet by the time that he conveyed it.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts? Options available? In that staff report on page 6 and 7, 6 of 7 and 7 of 7, Mr. Lean lays out a couple of possibilities, and Ms. McNair, in her report, toward the end of it, offers a couple of other options. So there we are.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I have one more question for Kim, if I may.
go ahead, certainly.
Kim, you mentioned the easement value. So let's hypothetically get rid of the pole thing. It's been resolved. Is it still your position that at that point Pacific Power would have the ability to get value out of that easement before the road went through?
I think as a technical matter, yes, but as a practical matter, no. Yes,
Okay.
technically, I think anytime you acquire somebody's easement right, it has some value.
And how would you determine that value?
You get an appraiser and they come back and say it's worth, 20
Gotcha.
bucks or like, I don't know if you guys have ever condemned for public road, but it's sort of the similar
Gotcha.
circumstance. But here, Pacific Power is not asking for any, we're happy to move the poles just based on the location cost with that. And we would want, instead of monetary consideration for the easement, we want replacement
Sure.
rights in the same,
Sure.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts?
Just a point of clarification from anybody at Pacific Power. What is the cost for undergrounding poles 2 through 10 versus moving them versus taking the poles out? Because it's $55,000 to trench them, but what's the cost to get rid of them and take out the poles?
I'm not, let me see if I can find the answer to that. If you give me 1 second. Let's see. Yeah, I think Lance was right in terms of the incremental difference between moving poles 2 through 10 in an overhead relocation and moving them in an underground relocation is about $50,000. So I think that's the 55 he was talking about is the incremental difference between an overhead relocation and an underground. And I think I don't think there's any dispute that the city would pay that incremental undergrounding difference.
So there's no additional fee besides pole removal or whatever for 2 through 10?
No, the full cost, so I have an email, this is from June of 2017 from Eddie Steiner, who's the estimator, and he says the estimated overhead relocation cost is $107, the estimated underground conversion is $161, $942. Those are the two different expenses. So if we just did an overhead, it'd be $107,000.
Why so much when we're willing to dig the trench and put in a common trench? It's not rocket science to put cable in a conduit in a trench that we paid for.
You're, probably you're asking, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that. I know there's incremental, there's additional things that have to happen when they go underground and when they're all
understand.
together. I don't know all the details, that's the estimator's estimate, and
My father was an engineer, I can
Okay.
understand what the underground costs, but it's not
Yeah.
$101,000.
well, no, the incremental difference is 50,000 between an overhead relocation and an underground. The difference is 50,000 between those two things.
Mark, there would still have to be transformers and stuff.
Oh, I understand, but
established, yeah, so
But it's not going to be $160,000 for a transformer to go from the high voltage down to the underground.
Do you have Eddie's email there? What's the total cost for relocating the power underground? Just that total cost, I think that'll help, Mark.
161,942.
Plus 90,000 for the pole number 1, we're at $250,000.
Thank you.
Sorry.
It also should be mentioned that we took Eddie Steiner's numbers and assumed that they were almost a year old, and that's why your report shows the 161 is now 165,
Yeah.
assuming inflation and cost have increased in that period of time, and it was a nice even round number.
That's
But,
correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Folks, where would you like to be?
Wolfgang's?
Besides home and not having to think about this? Yeah. Yeah. Anywhere else? Yeah.
Let's not all jump in at once.
Do we need a quick timeout to let people ponder this?
That probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Well, we probably need to discuss it openly.
That's what I'm saying, call a special.
Okay. I guess our 5 minutes are up. Let's go back into session and try to sort this out if we can. So, go ahead, Counselor.
In talking to the city attorney counselors, their option 1 and 1A is requiring Pacific, and Wally, please correct me if I'm saying something wrong here, requiring Pacific Power to take responsibility for paying for that. Option 1A, apparently there's a $240 data penalty that accrued from January 1st, Wally, is that
Yes.
correct? That option 1A would be dismissing that penalty against PP&L. And I'm assuming, is there something that assumes they do it in a timely manner, or we just have to do it in good faith, or?
Well, your option 1 has a completion date no later than June 1st of 2018, which from our construction schedule is what we need to have those undergrounded so the rest of the paving and the sidewalk and the rest of the project can move forward.
Is that a
So-
realistic date from Pacific Power's statement? I mean, we don't want to say something that can't be done. Forget all the money.
So I'm just gonna say this, we'll move those poles when the city pays for it. That's kind of where we're at, you know, I mean, and we're gonna stand firm with that, you know, so, Mark, I hate to be so upfront, you know, but that's kind of where we're at.
Well, just, I appreciate your honesty, there's nothing there. I was asking if June 1st was a realistic timeframe, if we took all the money out of the equation. But if,
We could, if the money was out of the equation, I think we could make that happen.
Okay.
We would have to move quickly though, and new easements would have to be established for the new location, depending on how we go about this. And again, I deal with a really high level with our communities and customers. I don't deal with our estimating department directly, so I'm not a technical expert on how all this would play out, just for the record. But ultimately, we could probably do that.
Yeah, I don't want to set us up for a failure.
Right.
That's so, let's start with the grounds where we're not setting us up for a failure. So, thank you.
My pleasure.
Someone want to offer a motion on this yet? Are we ready to do this at all?
I move that we take option number 1. I move that the city find Pacific Corp in breach in violation of its franchise agreement, as stated in number 1.
Yeah, we've got a motion on the floor to go with staff recommendations, option 1.
I'll second it.
And a second now. Any discussion or any more discussion?
Just for point of clarification, option 1 includes the penalty?
Yes.
Yes. I just don't see any way around the highlighted area where it says in the agreement that Pacific Power shall move the pole if the city needs it to for city business. I mean, it's really, really clear. I don't know how to get around it.
Case law and history support you.
Any other discussion?
I'm in favor of waiving the penalty, but we can't do that because we have a motion on the floor to take it with the penalty.
Unless you want to amend the motion.
Got a call
We
for
have-
the question, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Question's been called. Alyssa, would you poll the council, please?
Sure. Councilor Cronquist?
I'm going to abstain because of the penalty? Or can I do that, or what do I do?
Well, there isn't really grounds to abstain.
Yeah.
So do I just vote present? Present? Aye.
Come on.
Councilor Usselman?
Yes.
Councilor Quigley?
No.
Councilor Glidewell?
Yes.
Councilor Mullen?
No.
Motion passes 3-2.
It passes 3-2?
Yes.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Alyssa.
The
Okay,
process,
that's-
Mr. Mayor,
Wally?
the franchise agreement requires an order and findings. So your voice vote today simply is an instruction to staff to create that document, which we'll bring back to you at another meeting for formal adoption. Hopefully it'll be at your next meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ling, for your input this evening. Thank you, folks, for being here tonight. I can't imagine a successful attorney that doesn't speak clearly and very brightly, so I do appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you.
Very nice to hear that. Thank you. Let's see, staff commission reports, none. Comments from the public, anyone have anything? Ms. Hook?
I'm Paige Hook and I live at 2088 Quail Run Avenue. And I just wanted to say that I feel like what's going on with your guys' discussion between basically Berkshire Hathaway Energy and the small city of Stayton is just, for lack of better terms, a bullying the residents of Stayton by saying either they're going to pay through taxes of the city, which we've paid, and the city's going to pay for it, so the citizens are paying for it, or they're going to raise our rates. I'm a customer of Pacific Power, and it upsets me to hear that their option is either the city's going to pay, so the residents are going to pay, or the customers are going to pay anyway. So either way, it comes out of my pocket. And to hear that I don't know if I really have a question. I'm more just upset, and I'm hoping that you guys will continue to work on this and fight for the citizens, because I don't like being bullied. I don't think anyone here in the Stayton community likes to be bullied either. And to hear the lawyers say that they don't have like a fund to pull from for this, Berkshire Hathaway Energy, on their Twitter account, it says they have a $91 billion portfolio. Warren Buffett is their like bigwig. He's one of the richest men in the United States of America. Philanthropist too, but still. So it angers me to hear that that they don't have a fund for this. They have a fund, or they can create a fund. So sorry I went off on a little rant there, but thank you guys for voting the way that you did tonight. I don't know what the repercussions for the city are going to be, but you guys fought for the residents, and I appreciate that.
You still want to be on the planning commission?
Sure do.
I'm messing with you, I'm sorry. Anyone else? Anyone else? Business from the city manager, Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In your packet is the annual budget fiscal year 18-19 draft. A lot of the information I think would not necessarily be of particular note or interest. It's more internal, but there are the preliminary dates we've set for the budget committee hearings, reading of the messages, and budget committee meetings, and then approval. So we put that draft in the packet and information, and we'll be publicizing this, and I just wanted to call it out and note it. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Keith. Business from the council this evening? Anything?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead, please.
So I received notice today about a meeting happening, I guess, the 20-something here, the 22nd here, regarding the planning of the park.
The 20th.
The 20th? Yeah.
It's the 22nd, actually.
22nd.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But just wanted to say that I'm really, I was really pleased to see that come out, and to ask the community to come forward and be part of that whole planning process. That was great.
Okay, thank you, Priscilla.
Be that way throughout.
Any other business from the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes. Councilor?
I just wanted to give a quick recognition to the guys in the PD. The last couple of weeks have been a very trying time to be a police officer in the city of Stayton. And the professionalism and the level of composure that you guys keep to do the right thing is astonishing to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I can't imagine some of the stuff that you guys have to come up with, and how you handle that from an officer standpoint at night. Just be commended.
Thank you. We really
So,
appreciate that.
Please convey it to the guys for me.
Mr. Mayor, how is the library Brews and Blues, and how's the art show going?
The Brews, Bites, and Books event went very well, and we had the opening reception for the art show last Friday. It was very well attended, and the art is in the library now for the next 2 weeks. So we invite you to come look.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else this evening? We got future agenda items, transportation master plan on the 20th of this month, and a total compensation study. That sounds interesting. Maybe I can get in on that. Anything else? If not, it's the 9-hour approaches. Some have to work tomorrow. Let's go home.